Howdy once again, it's tubalcain, your humble servant, and welcome back to my videos. And this is tips number 408, but really it's a follow-up and possibly a temporary video in reference to tips number 407, where we just covered a lot of material. I had an awful lot of responses and comments, and I wanted to bounce back to you off of some of those. And as I just said, I am your humble servant. Well, one time I had a conference with one of my principals, and somehow or another, since he was kind of mad at me because I wouldn't travel with the girls' cheerleading squad or something like that, they always wanted you to do ridiculous things, even though my time was consumed in the shop doing repair work and things like that. But so anyway, I said, Mr. So-and-so, I'm a humble man. And you know what he told me? He said, well, you got an awful lot to be humble about. So that humbled me even more. So let's talk about these boxes now. And in this previous video, I talked about the beauty of these boxes, and people responded, many people responded and said they love the Starrett boxes much more than the Brown and Sharpe boxes. But let me show you something here if I can find it on my phone. You will recall in that last video I went to a household auction, and as I came in the door of the auction house, there's a real low table, real long and low, with a lot of junk piled on it, mainly household goods. But I tell you, I wasn't even to the place where they sold coffee before I spotted those Brown and Sharpe boxes. And really that was the only thing on the entire table that I bought, and I had my wife bid on it. And by the way, I told you I think I spent $250 at that auction. Well, my wife lost the car keys, and a new key is $220. Yeah, so that auction cost me $500 almost. All right, so most people like the Starrett boxes, but this particular box is left from when I was working at Osborne Engineer, and I had to go to Herky Hardware and buy a combination square, and the Brown and Sharpe head came in there. Well, and I still like these boxes, and I believe this is a more recent box that I found among my junk since I made that last video, and there's just nothing but a bunch of feeler gauges in there. So this came from an auction. I think that logo was long before this particular item. But anyway, people responded and they said, you know what, that looks like a used car salesman's jacket, or his tie, or some other ridiculous things. But you know what, now that they've criticized it, I know I'm gabbing, but you know what it reminds me of now when I think about it? Children's pajamas. And I loved it to see my little kids running around with their footy jamas on Christmas. So, but now it's really ruined it for me. I no longer like the Brown and Sharpe box because I will think of pajamas, and you see these fat people coming into the convenience store wearing flip-flops and pajamas when they get their coffee in the morning, and it's just sickening. And they got the big yellow curled toenails, and it just saddens me that we have lost so much civility in this country and probably the world. And you see the way people dress when they come on an airplane, it's almost a joke. But I can spot Starrett box from across a 40-acre field or one of these, and I know you can too. And would there be anything prettier under your Christmas tree than a Starrett box with a little ribbon on the corner? So consider telling your wife what you want out of KBC Tools. Now, I know I'm going to mention KBC Tools a lot now because they are one of my sponsors, and I have been ordering from them since 1970, so it's not a Johnny-come-lately. All right, I guess that's probably enough on the boxes. So let's get back to some of the other things that were in that video that were, I thought, interesting. Hope you do. Okay, this is the Brown and Sharpe from that ill-fated auction where my wife lost the $200 key. I really resent these high-priced keys. That I don't worry about people stealing a car. We don't need a stupid chip in that, and they've got the price jacked up out of this world, and they also have it fixed so you have to go to the dealer, even though Walmart says, we make electronic. No, they don't. I checked. Not to fit my cars. You're getting mad talking about it. Sorry about that. Okay. Here's one thing that surprised me. when I discovered that this was a rebranded Helios. I thought I would get tremendous response about the quality of Helios, especially from Europeans and Germans and so on, because I had always thought that probably this was one of the finest brands of precision tools in the entire world, but really nobody mentioned that. So either I'm wrong or a lot of you are wrong, and I don't know which is which. But so I talked about that, but then I had criticism, of course. Immediately I always get a lot of criticism. There's no shortage of critics. Somebody said, well, you know, there's never been a statue made of a critic. I thought that was pretty good. But first of all, I was criticized by running this clear off the end, you know, where I should have taken it apart. And probably you're right, because in fact, the rack ends right there, so the pinion had to travel across an untoothed portion. But I need to point out to you that if you go back to look at video 407, at the 10-minute 32-second mark, you'll see that there is a little leaf spring behind the pinion that takes up that, protects it. Well, that's also the leaf spring that allows the pinion to jump a tooth if there's a chip in there. So it's part of the design. I don't know if all calipers are made that way, but I took mild offense to that because it is protected by that. Now, here's one thing that surprised me. People say, well, you fool. Why did you take the whole thing apart? You didn't need to. My calipers came with a little tool, like a little piece of shim stock or something that you merely slip in there and you can reset it. And you know what? You people are totally right. It's just that in my entire life, I never owned a brand new one. So if those were included in the kit, they were long gone. I never did see them. But to satisfy those people, this other, where is it? Oh, this one. Yeah, the genuine Helios. I think if you remember from that previous video, it did not zero out. I said, well, no problem. So I took a piece of brass wire, this is brass wire, and simply slipped it down here. Well, the brass wire kinked almost instantly because it's soft, it's not tempered. So I did take a piece of very small diameter springy wire from Brownells, and down it went. And of course what I'm doing there is by feel moving the pinion away from the rack just a little bit, and then it jumps one tooth. Well, of course, the first time it didn't zero out, but by baguesse and bagasse method, at some point I got it to zero out, and it worked just fine. So that is the preferred way by me. I don't know about the rest of you out there in the world, and thank you for watching my videos. I'm talking fast because I drank a lot of coffee, and it's still morning. Okay, but another thing I wanted to say here, and it's almost ironic, is that I took apart the Brown & Sharpe with also the intent to clean it, and I did clean it. Remember the time I spent cleaning it and zeroing this out? But the one that really needed the cleaning is this one, and yet I did not take it apart. I used the wire method to zero it out. But this one is my rough one. I told you I keep this out in the garage and for mechanical use, because this was a $5 caliper. Now I value it more because I got it zeroed out, and I should take it apart and clean it, but you're right, I'm not in the mood. And then there was considerable discussion. Go back and read the comments. Go into my videos and read the comments, because there's always a bunch of great ones. Some mean ones too, but generally I delete those. But immediately people say, well, I don't like the Brown & Sharpe anyway, I like the Starrett. And you know, everybody has their own preferences, and certainly the Starrett, and they're just a mystique about Starrett. No matter what the product is, and I do love them. I think though some of their tools now are being imported and you know, aren't made there in Athol, Massachusetts. Remember that Leroy Starrett is the one who invented the first combination square if you're interested in that kind of industrial history, and I certainly am. Then in the comments someone said, do they make a left-handed calipers? And to be honest with you, I do not know, but someone said they do. But why don't you put in the comments if you know where to get one? But I doubt if it's one of the major manufacturers. I suspect it's something that you buy at the so-called left-hand store. But is there a left-hander with the dial out here? I had a son who is a southpaw, and sometimes we used to go to in Branson, called the left-hand store. So everything was left-hand, but of course mainly they were gadgets and so on. But I do recall buying him a pair of left-hand scissors. But the next time I went to Branson, it was gone, because again, it was all novelties in there and junk. But of all things, my two Mitutoyo, and I love these, height gauges, I've got a right-hander and a left-hander. Now, whether it's meant to be a left-hander or if they just put it together backwards, I do not know. However, this left-hander, it's in better condition than this one. I don't know if they both were brand new when I got them, but I think this one was new old stock because it's kind of yellowish and the dial is smaller and, you know, a couple other things. But it is very awkward for me to use this one because I have to turn it around, set it, and then swing it like that in order to use it. But let's call that a left-hander, and let's call that a right-hander. And not to belabor the point, but do they make a left-hand micrometer? Do they make a left-hand, you know, they make left-hand shotguns. 10% of the people are left-handers, you know, in the United States. And just a little history, not history, a little lesson for you. When I took Latin, the word in Latin for left-handers is sinistra, or something like that. I may have that slightly wrong, but that's 50 years ago, 55 years ago that I took Latin. But there was something considered sinister about left-handed people, and superstitious things, crazy things going on. And so that's where the word sinister came from, if anyone cares. Who cares? Said the ravishing redhead. You can turn this off if you're sick of me talking, but I've talked a lot about Westclocks and the radium dials and the Radium Girls. In Ottawa, Illinois, here's a statue at the site of the old radium luminous dial company. Most of the Westclocks dials were outsourced, and it was done in Ottawa, even though Westclocks was in Peru. Many women died of this. So a statue was erected. There is a book written about it. There are magazine articles. There's a woman dying of the radium disease. And there were a lot of articles years ago on that. And it's a very sad thing. My mother had a friend by the name of Ruth. We used to pick her up. I've told the story before. For church, her face, she had been a radium girl, a radium dial girl, and her face was incredibly red, kind of like she had a bad sunburn or a terrible windburn, but it was always that way. However, she lived to be in her 80s, but every year she had to go to Argonne National Laboratories, that's up near Chicago, and for evaluation and part of a study. But it was sad, and my dad used to talk a lot about this. And you know, when I was 10 years old, my Aunt Leona, who lived in Milwaukee, bought my brother and I Westclocks watches for Christmas. Even though they were made in Peru, they were bought in Milwaukee. But my dad said, well, those got radium dials, boys. You got to be careful of that. And I said, well, Dad, is it going to hurt me? And he said, no, just don't fall asleep. Don't wear your watch to bed. Because if you should fall asleep and the watch is next to your eye, it could blind you or something like that, which scared the heck out of me. That probably was not true. My father knew some of the radium dial girls and said that the way it was done is they had very tiny paintbrushes, much smaller than this, and they would dip them into the luminous paint and then stick it in their mouth to form a very fine point so they could paint the numbers on the dials. And that's what poisoned them. Also, the girls during their break would paint their eyebrows and their lips and things like that, and then go into the bathroom and turn the lights off, and they would glow. You know, they were having fun. They were children. They were girls, teenagers, and teenagers will do anything. And I don't know if they were warned about the dangers of radium, but I'm sure the company didn't give a darn. But we must remember that Madame Curie died of radium poisoning. There are the poor slave girls sitting almost at desks at the Radium Dial Company. You can turn this off if this is boring, but there they are painting the dials. Now, when that factory was torn down, eventually they dug up all the earth and it's moved to another place in Ottawa, and they've dug it and redug it. Now there's a huge fence around it. But the good news is, I think that in 10,000 years or so, it will have reached its half-life. So, I don't know if I can zero in on it, but think of the tedious. They had to be young girls with great dexterity and perfect eyesight. Alright, that concludes this rather long, rambling video. Hope you liked some of it. Continue to watch my videos on Machine Shop. This is Tubalcain saying so long for now, and I'll see you in my next video.